Hello, YouTube. There was this news item in 2023. A digger led an illegal excursion or tour into the dungeons of Moscow, and under heavy rain, the collector of the underground Neglinka river filled up instantly and all the tourists disappeared. What the diggery, coming from the English word digger, are, you will find out from the video that I did a few years ago, and I put the URL in the description to this video here. But what is the underground of Moscow, below the ground of Moscow, or rather subterranean world of the Russian capital? Well, I have described it in my previous videos, but I want to add a few more facts today, as this is an endless subject involving secret history of the Russian capital and the Russian state, esoteric subjects, paranormal, crime, and state secrets. Under leadership of Nikita Khrushchev in the USSR, one of the walls of the Vladimir Lenin's mausoleum cracked when the soil suddenly dropped 10 centimeters. The engineers had to open this layer to find out the reason why it happened, and they came across a hole, the entrance leading down. So they went to explore it, and they came to a network of ancient tunnels under the Kremlin at the depth of 15 meters. The hole was filled in with concrete. The mausoleum, that's where the body of the first Soviet leader is located, was repaired, but the problem did not go away. Under the Russian capital, there is a real layered pie of secret passages, tunnels, and rivers created by people during the past 900 years. It is said that the diggery counted 12 levels of tunnels and passages, but they could not get into the 13th and below. They say it's a giant anthill without ants, and an underground city that's bigger than Moscow. The first subterranean passages and rooms near Moscow appeared in the 12th century under the founder, Prince Yuri Dolgoruki. The princes of Moscow kept weapons, provisions, and jewelry in hiding places and dug underground exits outside the Kremlin to escape in case of a siege. The roof of an ancient tunnel and a more recent one under it are quite often found there. Furthermore, wooden Moscow burned down, and in the Posad outside the Moscow Kremlin, citizens began to dig the ground to save money and property from fires. Posad, it's a type of settlement in East Slavic lands between the 10th to the 15th centuries. It was often surrounded by ramparts and a moat, adjoining a town or a Kremlin, but outside of it, or adjoining a monastery. The Posad was inhabited by craftsmen and merchants and was its own distinct community separate from the city it adjoined. Thieves and counterfeiters broke through the passages and hiding places under Moscow houses to take out stolen goods or store them for the duration of a police investigation. Moscow was most heavily excavated by those subterranean passages in the 15th, 17th centuries, when the Crimean Tatars stormed Moscow and the invaders from Poland plundered during the time of troubles. Even Moscow monasteries dug dungeons to save icons and monks. The collector of the Neglinka river divides into two. In a downpour, it fills with a roaring stream of water up to the ceiling in 30 seconds. Listen, I also attached the URL of my video about this uncanny river. You can see it. Some dungeons were sheathed in wood. Others were laid out with bricks and stones. Some dungeons could be accessed through the basement of huts or homes, while others could be reached by stairs in the walls of chambers and towers. Over time, the owners of the tunnels and underground rooms died. The passages were forgotten and no maps were made. By the way, this happened also to the treasures and books that were not supposed to be read and so forth, stashed away in the attics of the old buildings, especially in the 20th century, when wars, revolutions, secret police, and socialism destroyed many lives in the country of my birth. Some people started looking for such treasures in the 1970s and beyond, although in my youth I remember there were some quiet, unpretentious people who moved about back in late 1960s and were looking for stuff in those abandoned attics and in the old subterranean storage places beneath Kiev. But if you had no respiratory protective equipment, bad things happened to the treasure hunters. But let's go back to the Moscow's underground secrets. Ancient tunnels were covered with silt, mold, and sand. Wooden arches were rotting away. Ancient dungeons were sinking down. And in the new cultural layer above, the next generations of Muscovites dug their tunnels. Sewers and collectors of buried rivers were added to all this. And in place of which houses, streets, and avenues were built right above. The collectors of Moscow's streams have further complicated the exploration of the dungeons. Well, explorers tried to do their job to explore the dungeons of Moscow and make a map. And I'm speaking about those who did it because of their interest, not financial, but historical and civic, I should say. Especially when they wanted to find the missing library of Ivan the Terrible. For example, in the 1900s, Prince Sherbatov was engaged in this, I would say early 1900s. And in the Soviet times, the first real digger was Stiletsky. And following the results of the descents, of his explorations down below, he wrote to the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, "The dungeons of Moscow are, if not completely, then very much destroyed, even under the Kremlin. So you can't just open the entrance and walk under the Kremlin, especially not under the entire capital. Traveling through the below-ground Moscow is a race against death. But if everything is explored and cleaned, it will be a giant museum of ancient Russia." There are only homemade digger maps of individual locations near Moscow. Stiletsky's zeal was not appreciated. All his entrances that he found were filled with concrete, and the findings were classified. Then nuclear shelters came about, the subway, the Kremlin Metro 2, and automobile tunnels began to be built near Moscow. They say you can get underground from the Kremlin to Domodedovo Airport. The new tunnels of the USSR and then the Russian Federation, the tunnels of the 12th through 19th centuries, all this created an underground or subterranean labyrinth, and it is easy to get lost in galleries, passageways, and walled-up doors near Moscow. To fall into a blocked and forgotten entrance to an older level out of the 12 known ones and not be able to get back out. The best cave explorers in the world can no longer explore the dungeons of Moscow, even if the authorities remove the top secret label from some sites. And the bowels of Moscow, are now in the gray zone, so to say, of illegal tours and, as they say, as some people say, greedy diggery. In my youth, I had explored the tunnels under Kiev, but for what you can call as curiosity about enigmas of history, sheer adventure, considering my age at the time, of course, general curiosity. But this is a dangerous undertaking because people do sometimes find unexploded ammunition as well as some historic items that are better left alone in the ground. Kiev is an ancient city with many secrets buried in its hills and other places. I lived in a very interesting part of town, and I describe it in some other videos, and in many ways a mystic part of town because you get the aura of past centuries and more than that. Anyway, Moscow has its own, and in the future I'll be giving one-on-one consulting presentations, and if anyone is interested in subjects or other paranormal, we can talk. But this is what I wanted to let you know today, and I will be telling you more about those subterranean secrets of Moscow and, of course, other cities in the Russian Federation, as well as Belarus, Ukraine, and then we get into Central Asia, in itself a fascinating subject, for much is buried under the sands of that region. If you like my research, please support through the links you find in the description to this video. Please like my videos, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your attention to my work.